Well, this may seem like a little bit strange subject for out on the front porch. Let me tell you, I imagine that my parents, I don't know for sure, but I imagine that my parents were pretty much like Americans today. They knew they had a constitution and that it protected them, but I think they pretty much took it for granted. You know, it wasn't really a thing in their daily lives. But let me tell you what, the Europeans that came and sat on our porch and talked on hot summer evenings, unless there was a thunderstorm going on, they didn't take it for granted. Let me tell you, they studied it, they understood it, and they proclaimed it as the savior of the world, not just the United States. I remember one Polish guy saying that he would carry the Constitution with him anywhere in the world he went if he had to go into war this coming World War II, so that he could remind the world that he was a free man. I'm a product of that. Probably I got more of my belief in the Constitution from the people who came into the country and studied the Constitution to become citizens than I did my parents. I'm kind of fanatical about it, I know, and maybe people on Facebook get tired of hearing me talk about it, but to me it's the most important document ever written, alongside the 10 Commandments. Whether you believe in God or not, as far as I'm concerned, the 10 Commandments offer all the things we shouldn't do and all the things we should do, and the Constitution supplies all our rights to do it. I got up this morning about 8 o'clock, stumbled my way out into the living room, sat down in my rocking chair. My wife was playing games on her iPad, and my daughter was reading a book. Well, their privacy and doing what they were doing was over, because I like to talk when I get up. I talked to Tina and kept interrupting her until finally she put her book down. And we sat talking. I don't know how the subject come around to immigration. Well, I was talking about illegal immigrants. They're not illegal immigrants, they're migrants. Immigrants come through the legal system. Immigrants don't just walk across the border, they're migrants. Okay, sounds good to me. Tina, as a kid, was always for the underdog. If you said something about the underdog, you were in for an argument, and that's the way she always was. Tina put herself through college, got herself a master's degree, and she did it all herself. So she made out of good stuff. But you know what? So many people lose their common sense as soon as they get a little education. Well, Tina is highly educated, and she has kept her common sense and her understanding of what makes people tick. And so she's very interesting to talk to about this kind of thing. So Tina and I was talking about the problems that are going on in Europe, and how the migrants coming from the Middle East and all over are settling into Europe. And the Europeans are unhappy about it. The French have riots going on in the streets where the French are upset and sick and tired of people coming in on top of them and taking over. People who are used to violence and have lived with violence all their lives and know nothing any different. So they're a violent people. Germany suffers with it, France suffers with it, it's all over Europe. And we're having the same problem. We have people coming across the border who have lived and were raised in countries where there is no law, basically. Some of those countries, Honduras and some of them, have been overrun by criminality. And the reason is the government doesn't govern. Governments without strong constitutions can do anything they want to. So they sit in their palace. A few guards outside guarding them. They don't care what's going on in the country because they're living a good life and things are fine with them. They don't half pay the police department. So the gangsters and the mobsters pay the police department. You know, the gangsters do everything they can to keep those guys in power. After all, they're making it safe for them to operate out of that country. They don't prosecute the gangsters. So they say, we have a constitution that I'll protect you. So the country is basically run by gangsters. And that's what socialism does, because socialism has no strong, powerful constitution where the people's rights can just be taken away. We have a constitution that comes down from probably 6,000 years ago, when the Jews recognized a God, and mankind was thought to have rights, whether it was from God or whether it was just the rights of man. And that come down for thousands of years, and finally here in the United States it came about that men are free, and they're inalienable rights that cannot be taken away by government or anybody else, because government didn't give them. So if you think your Constitution came from founders of the country, you're wrong. All they did was recognize those rights. So anyway, I'm sorry I took over here with this, because I wanted to tell more about what Tina thinks, but I can't keep my mouth shut. The Greeks and Romans created democracy, and they used it, but they used it as a way to control the people, not to give them freedom. Democracy allowed the government to give people games to watch, to give them feasts in the streets, and it was all just to keep the people satisfied. The Roman leaders conquered other lands and brought back booty, and kept most of it for themselves, but they gave a little of it to the people to keep them happy. They called them the rabble. They looked down on them. They were trashy, nasty people that lived in the streets, and they were the rabble. Well, that was kind of what the Roman Catholic Church was used to, accustomed to, and this is what they believed in for whatever, 1,000 years, couple hundreds of years. And along came Martin Luther. Well, he had different ideas. He thought about the people as individuals, and that they should have rights, and they should have the right to pray for themselves if they want to, without having to go through some mediator in between. So he wrote many books and many essays on his opinions. And as luck would have it, the Gutenberg press come along just about the same time, and they were dying for stuff to print for people to read because they could sell it. And Martin Luther was exactly the right person to keep them supplied with media, as we call it today. So the fact that he was the first social media user and changed the whole world through the Gutenberg press should be amazing to Americans, but I never heard anybody but me even talk about it. Later on, much later on, the founders of this country wrote the Constitution, but they didn't give us the Constitution. The Constitution was ours before it was ever written on a piece of paper or a parchment. Gutenberg, and from the big hand in the Reformation, and they formed the, which was where a lot of the founders got a lot of their ideas. And then there was the Magna Carta written by the English, but it didn't protect the people. It protected royalty, lower class royalty, from the power of the king. Our founders had English ideas, Italian, Greek ideas, and it gave us the most valuable thing that any person can receive, and that's freedom. Well, they wrote the Constitution, and they immediately, when the country was formed, immediately circumvented it to claim that blacks were not human, to claims that black men were not men. Therefore they didn't have the constitutional rights that white men had, so they could just take the rights away, made them slaves. Well, I'll say one thing for Abe Lincoln, he was right about this. No man should have to work without getting the benefits of his labor. Well, guess what socialism believes in? Socialism believes that if I work 100 hours a week, I should share my wealth with the guy who works 10 hours a week, or 3 hours, or doesn't work at all because he's unfortunate. Well, that makes me some kind of fool, doesn't it? It also means I'm not a free man. So, I watched a lady on TV this morning on C-SPAN, and she is a reporter, and she went down to the lower end of Mexico and down in San Salvador and places like that, and traveled north with these groups of migrants coming to the United States. Well, she said, and I agree with her, she said that they form these huge numbers of people that are coming up through in order to protect themselves. 1,000 women can protect themselves from rape. 1,000 men who don't have power and strength and weapons can protect themselves from criminals and drug lords and people like that, because there's power and strength in large numbers. So here they come. Well, you know, I feel sorry for them people, and they have a terrible problem coming from countries that have no law, nothing to protect them. They have no constitution to give them rights. Some have tried to form democracies down there, but they form democracies without strong constitutions that give them rights. So the democracies become socialist countries, and the socialist countries without those human rights just become kind of like mafia leaders. You work for me and you be loyal to me and I'll protect you from the law and you can do anything you want. Well, that's the problem with socialism, because it can't recognize human rights, because it has to be able to take some people's human rights away and give it to other people's human rights in exchange for their votes. Now, how about that? That's what we're talking about for America when we talk about socialism for America. We're going to have elites in Washington, D.C. giving people money, my money or your money, because we work, in order to get their votes. They're buying votes. And that's all it is. These congressmen and women who are advocating for socialism, most of them are really, they're immigrants, or second generation Americans maybe. They're only advocating for themselves and their ideas, not representatives of the people. If they were, they would never, ever suggest that we should be socialist in this country, because that goes entirely against the idea of freedom. You can't have freedom when the government gives you freedom, because they take it away anytime they want to. So this is all just part of what I think, and I guess probably I'm wrong about some of it, but I'm also, know this, I can't be wrong about all of it. So this is something to think about. Okay, that's enough for now. Alright, well, I want to thank everybody for watching this video. My next video will be about the design and building and of the wolf trap. And maybe a little bit on the sailing of it. But so come back to see me, folks.